I said to Mike the other day, we're going to name our podcast that. Recording in progress. Just to make it awkward.
There you go. Hey, everybody. Hold on. Fuck, I can't do it. Hold on. You son of a bitch.
Love it.
I'm gonna leave this tagged into the end of the episode. You just
hell yeah, do it. Go for it.
Okay, here we go. Hey, everybody. My name is Taylor Gibson, and this is the Gr8Wyte Experience. Hey everybody, welcome to the Gr8Wyte Experience, the show where I talk about anything and everything of interest. My name is Taylor Gibson. Thank you for listening. For the 10th episode of the Gr8Wyte Experience, I felt it was time to do another edition of Let's Talk About. Now, Let's Talk About is a segment where me and a guest host will do a deep dive into a certain topic, whether it's somebody's body of work, an album, a game, etc. And for this episode, we will be doing a deep dive into the career and body of work of somebody who greatly inspired me to want to get into podcasting, filmmaker, podcaster, and just overall content creator, Kevin Smith. And joining me on the line is somebody who also inspired me and guided me into the world of podcasting, who also hosts his own podcast, Bahdcast, with previous guest, Mike McFarlane. Please welcome to the show, Neil Barron. Neil, how are you, man? Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. And thanks for not stealing my hoodie like you've stole, significant others.
Oh, yeah, God. I know. I will never, ever hear the end of this from her. I swear to God, sometimes.
I had to work it in there. It's in the podcast now. It's official. It's her hoodie.
Oh, good Lord. I mean, in fairness, she's the one wearing my Sen's. What is it? Like a blanket hoodie, babe?
A hoodie, and I bought it for you. So
that's right.
Is it like a Snuggie ripoff? Is that what
it's kind of like a Snuggie? Yeah, it's kind of like a Snuggie.
I can't believe that you admitted you kind of have a Snuggie.
She's the one who bought it. It's super comfy.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah,
you didn't spend your own money on it. That's fair.
That is fair, man. So, Neil, I'm super excited to have you on the show because obviously you were somebody who got me into podcasting years ago, but also this is your first time on the show, and we're going to be talking about somebody who I know you and I are big fans of, Kevin Smith. And he's somebody that honestly a lot of people will look back on his career with great fondness, obviously with when Clerks came out to some of the stuff he did with View Askew, and even now with the podcasting that he's doing in current days. So I got to ask right off the top here, well, first of all, how did you get into the work of Kevin Smith?
Funny enough, I worked at a movie store. That's where it all came in. I worked at one of the popular movie store chains back in the day, and it was not the blue and yellow brand. I will put it that way.
It was.
I'm not going to name. Yeah, it was the other one. I'm not going to name names, but it was the other one. And I was working there, and that's where I got exposed to Kevin Smith and his work up until that point, which wasn't a ton. I mean, really, because we're talking late 90s up until early 2000, let's say ish. But even up until then, it was still really impactful. So, and it was that movie store culture, much like what you see in Clerks to a certain degree, right? Like the talks, the conversations, which movie's better than this movie, and that type of thing. It's all accurate. So
I know for myself, because I can't obviously, right, because I didn't get a chance to work in a video store, but even back in the day, I remember going to video stores all the time. And I think that's what really stuck with me when I saw Clerks years later is that, yeah, that's pretty much what a lot of movie stores look like, minus, the foul mouth, somebody like Randall just sitting on the counter reading a newspaper.
It depends on the movie store. If you went to like the mom and pop movie store, depending on the day that you went and the time that you went, there's a very good chance you would encounter that. But if you went to one of the chains, you would never encounter that. There's no way. No. The only big difference besides obviously, the embellishment of that character for me would be the fact that the videos in the stores were front facing. That way you could see what you were, whereas that store, it was all spined and, so be it. It's a minor detail, but it's a pain in the ass when you work in a movie store to have them all front facing. So, because it takes up so much more room. But to see that film while working in a movie store, it's kind of apropos. So it's an eye opener. And to have a film in that time frame in black and white, it's all dialogue. Like there's no action to it. Like the most action that you're seeing in that film is like some guy playing with eggs at the back of the store, or some rendezvous in the bathroom in the store, but you don't actually see anything. It's discussed, but there's no action. It's all talk, and it's hilarious stuff. But oh my God, the stuff that gets discussed is just some of the raunchiest stuff too. And it's one of those things you have to go back and watch time and time again.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely, it's funny watching that movie now, because when you can make a direct comparison to what, say, Judd Apatow and Adam McKay would do years later. There's like direct link right to them.
Very much so. Yeah, very much so. And I think the biggest thing for me is there's a certain element of, I mean, you and I are big fans, but for the people that aren't familiar, I mean, there's a certain element of rock and roll to Kevin Smith in that first movie, because the fact that he was willing to bet on himself and max out credit cards to make this movie, like made it for, I think it was less than $30,000 American at the time. Like I said, maxed out credit cards. And that's how he got his foot in the door for Hollywood. Like he essentially, it was a big fuck you to Hollywood. I'm making this, and me and my friends are going to do this. And they did it. And the rest is history. That takes some balls. I mean, let's be serious.
Oh, it does. I mean, totally. So, and definitely look at the period of time when that movie came out, where you had Robert Rodriguez made El Mariachi. Obviously, Tarantino made Reservoir Dogs and later Pulp Fiction.
Yep.
Richard Linklater made Dazed and Confused. So there's a lot of very low budget movies that were coming out that were hilarious, and they were very groundbreaking for the time.
And cult classics like Dazed and Confused for me is right up there with Clerks. Absolutely love that film. But in terms of Kevin Smith stuff, that one was, well, like you said, it was groundbreaking. So that one for me was a big one. And that just opened the door to the rest of the career for me with Kevin Smith. And it's never really waned, it's been an interesting ride when you look at everything else, because there's been some detours and they've been interesting.
For sure. And definitely when we get to talking about our favorite Kevin Smith movies, we'll talk more about that. But I'll talk a little bit about how I got in it, because I remember it was one of those times where in my life, I was probably 11, 12 years old, and I first saw Reservoir Dogs, I saw Pulp Fiction, and my brother was like, "Hey, have you ever seen Jay and Silent Bob Strikes Back?" And I was like, no, never heard of this movie. So he popped it in, and the first scene was when you see Baby Jay and Baby Silent Bob sitting here, and Jay just gets out of the stroller and starts saying, fuck,
yeah.
Sings the fox. And that's the first impression of that. I was like, huh? And I think I love it. It's a movie that, and it's funny because I showed my girlfriend that, and I was just like, it's a movie that I think you really have to know a lot of the backstory of View Askew, and some of, like, you have to understand who Jay and Silent Bob are. You have to understand who Randall and Dante are. You kind of have to have this, because I think if you go into it without that, it's kind of lost on a lot of people.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I mean, you can watch it as a standalone and get a lot of the humor, but you don't get all of the humor. And it's pretty good as a standalone on its own. But like you said, you're not quite keyed into everything. It is, again, I'm biased because I'm a fan, but great film. I mean, the cameos in that one alone, come on.
I know, like so the money that just got thrown into that, where you have like Gus Van Sant and all the big names in that too. Like, it's amazing. Yeah,
it's ridiculous the talent they got for that movie. It's just unbelievable. But was that your first exposure to Kevin Smith? Okay.
It was. Yeah,
That's a heck of a movie.
I know. I wonder how differently it would have turned out if I had seen, say, like a Chasing Amy or something that's not as comedic, because I don't know if it really would have related to me. But for myself, it was one of those things where, and even after that, like I didn't really follow up on anything that he'd watched in my teen years. It wasn't until I got into late high school is when I saw Clerks for the first time. I saw Dogma for the first time, and I really enjoyed him. I enjoyed him for what it is. Dogma, definitely we talk about our Kevin Smith movies, is my favorite. But I really began to start following his work in 2012 when I started listening to his podcasts like Smodcast and Hollywood Babylon and Genocide Love Get Old. But it was honestly great. And I have so much to say about his movies. And I feel that even when I was putting this together, Neil, I was just one of these things for me. It was like, where do I really start? And we have to start at his movies, because this is, of course, 100%. This is what he'll always be remembered for. Yes, he'll be remembered for comics and he'll be remembered for everything else he does, but it's strictly the movies that he's best remembered for. And I already mentioned this movie, hands down my favorite Kevin Smith movie, Dogma.
Yeah, that's a fantastic one. Honestly, of all the stories that he's told in his films, that might be one of the best ones all around. And again, laden with cameos and great acting. And I mean, my God, Alan Rickman in that film, so good. But then again, Alan Rickman in pretty much any film, so good. But it's one of those stories where you can tell he really put the care and attention into it that it really did deserve. And not to say he hasn't in other films, but he just knocked that one out of the park. And to see who he had come in at the end to play the role of God was just, I mean, at the time it was mind blowing. You look back at it now and it's like, it was the 90s. Of course, that's who he had.
Yeah.
Right? Why not?
It's one of those endings. And I think for me, when I go back to watch Dogma, as somebody watching it in 2022, I think that's one of the big sticking points for me. Not because I don't think, spoiler, it's Alanis Morissette. Not because I don't think Alanis Morissette was good as God, but because I just think it's a reference. So many people, if they watch that today with absolutely zero understanding of how big Alanis Morissette is, it would just be like, okay. It would go clean over everyone's head. Yeah.
And that's fair. But then again, a lot of the references that they make to that movie in that movie in general to say other parts of the Bible would probably be the same way.
Yeah.
So, and the fact that like there's that story, and I don't know if you've ever seen the YouTube clip where there was the people protesting his movie. I mean, come on, the fact that he made up a sign to go protest his own movie and join these people and got on the news with it. How can you not love this guy after that? Makes up a sign saying Dogma is dog shit and goes and joins these protesters, gets on the news. And even the reporter's like, aren't you? No, I'm not him.
He's like, well, what's your name? My name is Brian Johnson.
Yeah, exactly. Like, come on.
That's still one of my favorite stories that he told on his Q&A DVDs was like when he talking about that, because of him and Brian Johnson, who was in Mallrats. He's been in a few movies that he's done. And it's just one of those things where, you know, when the reporter comes up to him and he says, it's Brian Johnson, and Brian's just like, oh, Jesus.
It's so good. I have to say, one of my favorites of his, it's probably going to be a little out of left field, but Red State. Absolutely love Red State. And it was a complete departure from everything else he's done. And it really set the tone for what the next few years of his movie making was going to be like. Because I mean, at this point, it's post all the other stuff in terms of the View Askew stuff. But it's pre-Tusk. It's pre, you know, all the good stuff that we're going to see to come. And yes, I'm counting, you know, like Yoga Hosers is there, but I'm still waiting for Moose Jaws. But anyway, it's just got it's too raw. It's too rough. You know what I mean? It hits too close to home in terms of how real it could actually be. Like the fact that he modeled some of those characters and that type of situation off of, say, Westboro Baptist. And it wasn't actually that much of a stretch when you sit down and think about it. It really just puts that much of an edge on it even more.
It does.
So it's, like I said, to have that much of a thriller, I guess, to come from Kevin Smith was the last thing I think anyone expected. And again, killer cast on it and some killer performances by actors at that point. I don't think the vast majority of us were familiar with, like Michael Park, right? That's got to be one of my favorites of his.
Oh, absolutely. And I have this in my notes too, because it was honestly one of those movies that took me by surprise with how much I like it. Because honestly, I'm not much of a horror movie guy, but you're absolutely right. And you nailed it on the head, is that I find the idea of Red State truly disturbing, because it's something that seems like it's not unplausible. It seems like absolutely like, okay, so these right-wing nutcases who basically have a church disguised, a hate group disguised as a church, they've decided that, okay, so if there's no funerals to protest, we're going to create them.
Yeah. And that's essentially it. And then the fact that you have like the feds get involved and things like that, and who they have playing some of the feds, and how it all ends at the end, like, again, without any spoilers, but, kind of Waco-esque. It's just, again, it's so well done. He kind of took pieces from more recent history and made it work for that film's narrative, and did it just to a T. It's so well done. So that one's got to be one of my favorites.
100%. And I think for me, and you mentioned it with the feds, the fact he got John Goodman to play that.
Oh God.
I love it. For me, John Goodman's probably one of my all-time favorite actors, just because, well, I loved him in Roseanne. I think he was so perfect in that. The Big Lebowski's obvious. Anything he did with the Coen brothers was amazing. But he's one of those guys, like, there's such a believability to everything he does. And for me, I don't know what it is. I think that even though I go back and watch some of the View Askew stuff, and you see, like, obviously Ben Affleck was in it, Matt Damon was in it, you see some of the big names I got for it, but to get a John Goodman, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what it is. For me, it's like Kevin Smith got John Goodman in this movie.
Yeah. I felt the same way about, like, say, Chris Rock and Dogma, or even Selma Hayek or Alan Rickman, or, name the actor that's appeared. Like, the first time that you watch Mallrats, it's like, holy shit, that's Stan Lee. How did he get Stan Lee?
Yeah, and this is pre, MCU. This is pre anything that Marvel was doing when they had his cameos, and he was doing it in 1995.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, what the hell? Like, who did he have to blow to get Stan Lee on Mallrats?
Yeah, but even going on to a movie like Jersey Girl, where he had Liv Tyler.
Yeah. Now, I will admit, this is probably one of my least favorite films of his, but there are some very bright moments in this film for me. One of them is probably Liv Tyler in terms of acting, and the other one, George Carlin. Obvious reasons. He's one of my favorite stand-ups of all time. And I love that relationship that he and George had from meeting on there, and having him in some of the other films like Jane Silent Bob Straight Back, and stuff like that. So it's not like I don't dislike the movie. It's just not my favorite of his films.
Yeah.
But again, it's a complete departure from almost everything else he's done otherwise.
Yeah, because it doesn't really have any humor in it. It's kind of a straight drama, if you really think about it. Because even like with something like Chasing Amy, which I don't know if it's a hot take, I personally think Chasing Amy is really overrated as a movie. And I don't know, maybe that's just me, maybe because I'm not a part of like the LGBT community that they're talking about. But for me, it's just one of those movies, I watch it, I'm like, it was all right. One of the big sticky points, of course, is Joy Lauren Adams. I hate her voice. Having to sit through a movie with her voice, and it's fine if she's in Mallrats because she has like a bit role or whatever movies. I don't want to have to hear that voice for 2 hours. Just a personal thing for me.
And I get how that might be a personal thing. See, I personally don't feel about that way about Chasing Amy. I think it's a great film, but I do get that it's a matter of personal preference, right? Like that would be like me feeling that way about Jersey Girl, and then somebody else coming along and saying, "Oh no, you're wrong. It's a fantastic film." It's not going to change my point of view. So, but I do understand what you're saying. Everyone's going to have their own taste, right? So you're not going to love every film in somebody's filmography. For me, I know which one is my weak point, and it sounds like you know which one is your weak point.
100%.
So,
and going back to Red State here for a second, the one scene in this movie, and I'm not going to lie, the first time I saw it, I legit turned it off and did not return for over 20 minutes, was the execution scene when they had the guy taped to the cross with the gag ball. I was just like, I'm sitting here like, what's going on? Where is this going? And then, of course, Ralph Garman, who is on Hollywood Babylon, brings out the gun out of the Bible. It's like, I was like, what did he just do? Did he really just do that?
Oh, they went there. Yeah, they went there. Yeah, if you haven't watched it, that you got to watch Red State. That film is really something else. It's worth it just for Michael Parks' performance alone. It's something else.
It is. And it's one of these movies, like, and I know for yourself, you probably have certain actors or certain movies that you watch and you're like, I don't understand why this person didn't win any awards or anything. And that's a movie that I go back and I'm like, how did Michael Parks not get nominated for anything?
Yeah. Basically? Oh, totally. It's a bit of a jaw dropper on that one. But then again, I felt the same way about him in Tusk too. Like you go back and watch that film, and again, it's a complete mind fuck of a movie, but fantastic performances. Yeah. Like Justin Long, at this point, you know what to expect from him as an actor. So not disappointed with him in that movie at all. And at that point, you've seen Red State, so you know what to expect from Michael, but still surprised in that film.
I think for me, Tusk is one of those movies that I feel the same way about Clerks, is that I think it's a movie that I'm more fascinating hearing about the backstory of how it came to be more than actually watching the movie. Because Tusk for me, and after watching Red State, I was like, oh man, this is going to be fantastic and whatever. And I'm watching it. I'm like, I don't know what it is. I'm not sure. I can't explain what it is. I just didn't hit the same kind of note for me. It was just kind of too weird, too really out there. I'm not going to lie. The first time I saw Justin Long as the Walrus, I burst out laughing. I was like, oh, that is A, ridiculous, and B, horrifying at the same time.
Yeah, it is a thriller, obviously, but it's a completely different type of thriller, right? It's not that psychological thriller where, you know, the suspense is building and you're just waiting for something to happen. No, this is a completely different type of thriller. And there's the visual payoff at the end. The backstory is totally awesome. I completely agree with you on that, which I guess may lead us into the next part that we might want to discuss, which is the podcast.
Absolutely. And we'll get there in a few minutes. But the final movie I want to talk about, we're talking about my favorite Kevin Smith movies, and Clerks has come up a number of times in here. And I know there's a lot of people who are going to disagree with this, but honestly, I found Clerks 2 to be more enjoyable. As crazy as it sounds.
I get that. I mean, so be it. You're into donkey shows. And
that's the first thing I want to hit on is that I'm not going to lie. This movie has two of my all-time favorite scenes that Kevin ever wrote. I mean, Kinky killing the sexy stud. How could you not watch that and just be like, what am I watching and why am I enjoying this? It's kind of like when you see Rosario Dawson come into the movies and she's just like, oh my God. And she's like, it's huge.
Yeah. It's, I guess the thing with the second one, because I can't, do I like it better than the first one? It depends on which way you're asking me, because it's hard to compare the two. The first one being the groundbreaker, so dialogue heavy and so well written. It just flows naturally for me. That's like almost like the gold standard. But Clerks 2 in its own right is great because it's a little bit more Hollywood, but you still get the moment like just mentioned. You get the rooftop. You get all those moments in the restaurant, like, you know, the one right comments, right, to rule them all. Like, there's so much that goes on in the movie that still makes it its own Kevin Smith film that you can love and appreciate. So I totally get where you're coming from with it. I do. The thing that I think makes the second Clerks for me was Pillow Pants. Pillow Pants might have been the unsung hero of Clerks 2.
Yeah, that was a scene that honestly, Jeff Anderson just sold that on his face. He's just like, and he knows he's looking at Elias, and Elias is telling this 100% truthfully. He's just like, yes, this is a real thing. And Randall has no answer for this. He's like, okay, I'm just going to get up here. And
this is why I haven't done anything with my girlfriend yet, because of Pillow Pants. And after this whole explanation, here's the punchline. Women, right? Like, seriously, after all this messed up stuff that Elias somehow believes, Elias is honestly one of the best Clerks too.
He was definitely the star of the show. But I think for me, I got to give it to Jeff Anderson, because Jeff Anderson, for me anyway, he made Clerks 2. The scene that really made it for me, of course, is the prison scene, where you
of course
finally get to this point where, and it's not like, okay, the whole 2.5 acts of this movie, there was nothing. And the third act, it's like, okay, Randall's now going to be like emotional about it. You watch it gradually build and build and build to, he gets to that point where he finally just tells Dante, he's like, I don't want you to leave.
Yeah. And like you said, it's not like he just, you know, blurts it out. There's a build up to it. So, and you can tell that it's a struggle for that character. So by all means, I think, yeah, it's hard to compare the two, but it is right up there. The other one I think we have to mention is Zach and Miri. I think that one deserves to be mentioned here as well.
I enjoyed it.
So, yeah, I only mentioned that because, you know, why not?
Yeah. Well, Zach and Miri, and I think it's kind of like Clerks in that way of like, I'm very fascinated when I watch the movie, because, you know, when you hear the backstory of how Kevin came to meet Scott Mosier and how Clerks came to be, you watch Zach and Miri and you're just like, oh my God, Kevin made a movie about that.
Yeah.
About what everything he went through. And it's something that a lot of the hardcore fans would really appreciate. But I think somebody coming into this fresh, having no idea about Kevin Smith, I think they would just see it as a fun movie.
Oh, totally. It is that total, like, nonsensical. It almost has, you mentioned him earlier, but it almost has a certain Judd Apatow feel to it, which again, I can appreciate, but it has that Kevin sense of humor. But to see guys like, you know, Craig Robinson in there, you know, and stuff like that. Oh my God, I love that film. It is just one of these stupid films that you can watch all the time. And you know it's stupid, but you don't care how many times you've seen it.
Yeah. I mean, that one scene where they're filming the scene with Jason Mewes and the blonde chick and the drunken.
Oh God, I was just about to.
And he's just like, hey, you guys like football? I was just in the Steelers game. Roethlisberger, the quarterback, was all fucking huck it, chuck it, football.
Honestly, the thing that got me was, well, there's a lot that got me in that movie. But again, Jeff Anderson in that film where he gets, you know, a face full of, Craig Robinson when he's laughing and he just said, her name Bubbles. Like, you know,
I like Bubbles.
It's just so much stupid stuff, but I love that film. So,
oh God, and it's one of those movies that I don't fully appreciate until I go back to rewatch it. I'm like, this actually is funnier than I actually give it credit for, because it was one of those movies that I think it had a lot of Apatow sort of things that you can see. I think if it wasn't for the fact that Mewes and Anderson were in it, I would have never thought this was a Kevin Smith movie.
Yeah. And I love the fact that, like, if you go back and watch it, knowing that Justin Long had actually improvised a lot of his lines between the scenes with him and Brandon Routh, that makes those scenes so much funnier.
Just his
Like when they're sitting.
Oh god, his delivery of "I'm an actor." I don't know what it is. It cracks me up every time.
It's just so good. So yeah, again, I think that one's an underrated one in the Smith filmography, but I think it needs to be mentioned.
Now, the funny thing about one of the great things about Kevin Smith as a filmmaker is that you see how naturally good of a storyteller he really is. And I've always given him credit for that. Is I think he's a better writer than he is a director, and you definitely see it in his movies. And that's the thing. And I want to talk a little bit about his Q&A DVDs because it's something that it's funny how he can tell a story about something, and then 45 minutes he's talking about how Jason Mewes is sucking off a pool cue at the rec center, and you're just like, wait, wasn't this? And you completely forget that's how the question started.
Yeah, totally. And I'm assuming you've watched like The Evening with Kevin Smith and stuff like that. And that's what you just said is not a word of a lie. Like there are times where it will take him a half hour, 45 minutes to answer a question. It's one of those things where, is that a blessing or is it a curse? I don't know. It's entertaining. I've seen him live do one of the Jane Silent Bob Get Old podcasts. It translates there too. They don't answer a lot of questions. So he's still that same person. I haven't watched them in a long time, honestly, but I remember watching them and being glued to the screen as he was talking, hanging on every word. It was just impossible not to pay attention.
And I went back and watched some of those Q&A DVDs. I have Eat an Evening, I've Sold Out a 3 Evening. And it's one of those things that you've nailed it right on the head there, is that absolutely. I sat down the first time and I watched it. I think the DVDs themselves are like 3.5 hours or give or take.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
About that. And it's one of those things where like you're watching it and it doesn't even feel that way because Kevin is such a good storyteller. He keeps the audience engaged. That's very, very hard to do at anything. And I think that's where Kevin as a podcaster is great because Kevin that's just him. He will just talk for an hour and a half and you're just engaged the entire time.
Yeah, totally. And I think the smart thing that he did when he was doing those talks was doing it on the college circuit, because really playing into the fan base and his strengths, because that's who was watching his films, right? That's who was paying for his stuff. So why wouldn't you go see them? So it made perfect sense.
But even looking back on it, and I know how Kevin is very engaged with fans on social media today, back in the late 90s or 2000s when I think the VSQ message board was still a thing, like he was very active on it. He talked to the fans. People in the Q&A DVDs always commented on that. And when talking about An Evening, 2 stories that come up, the Prince story, number one. I mean, you got to think this is a story that when you listen to it, it sounds ridiculous. And then you think about it, it's like, that sounds pretty spot on. Yeah,
exactly. It's like, especially once you hear other people with Prince stories, his doesn't sound that far-fetched.
No, especially with the Chappelle Show one, right?
Exactly. So it's like, okay, the first time you hear it, like you said, it's like, I don't know, that might be bullshit. But then it's like, after a while, it's like, yeah, okay, no, that probably happened.
Yeah. Well, it's like, what was it? His handler was like, Kevin, you don't understand something. Sometimes Prince will come to me and be like, it's 2 a.m. It's January in Minnesota. I need a camel.
Yeah, exactly.
Go get it.
And what the fuck are you supposed to do then? It's Prince. You do it. That's it.
Yeah. But even the story when he's in the Q&A thing talking with the fans, and next thing you know, Prince is talking about Jesus and the Bible. He pulls out the Bible out of his back pocket, and Kevin's just like, I didn't realize that thing even had pockets.
Yeah, totally. But again, you know what? It totally makes sense from the interviews and stories I've heard when people talk about Prince, about the type of person he was. So to hear Kevin's recollections of that now, looking back at it, not surprised whatsoever.
No. But even when he talks about him beefing with Tim Burton as well over Superman, because it's one of those things where I don't know, and I think that's definitely a reference that a lot of people would not understand today because Tim Burton is more known for like the big Hollywood pictures, but at the time he done like Ed Wood and Nightmare on Elm Street, Nightmare for Christmas, and he had done a lot of his like darker movie and Batman, obviously. And it's one of those things where like, yeah, he's just this goofy artist, and yeah, I would never read a comic book. And next thing you know, the Clerks guy is talking shit about him. He goes, "I'm sorry, he fucking said what about me?"
Yeah, and honestly, good on Kevin. Because, oh my God, could you imagine if Tim Burton got a hold of, let's say, name the property from DC besides Batman. Because with Batman, you can get away with a little bit of camp. Obviously, Adam West, hello. But name the other DC properties that Tim Burton could have got his hands on, and I don't think he could have done it.
No.
So good on Kevin.
Very much so, but it's one of those things where it's just like a lot of these comic book properties, they need the right writers, the right directors to kind of push them along. And I think a lot of people would look at the Zack Snyder Justice League movies as being like a perfect example of that, of like, you either kind of like him or you don't.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, starting a beef with Tim Burton, not the biggest, like, it's not going to be the biggest, feather in your hat, like really looking back at the whole thing. But at the time, it was a big deal. Although,
out of mere curiosity, would you like to see what a Nicolas Cage Superman movie would have been like? Out of mere curiosity, it's probably not going to.
I don't want to see a whole movie, but what I would like to see is a cameo of him as a Superman from a different Earth, like a multiverse type thing. That I could get behind. That would be cool.
I mean, if anybody's listening, you got a good idea right there.
Yeah, why not? I am all on board for that. I don't know, but I will say, completely off topic, I really want to see that new Nicolas Cage movie.
Yes, I know.
Massive Talent looks really good.
Apparently it's got like 100% on Rotten Tomatoes right now.
Yeah, it looks fantastic. So really excited to see that one. Anyway,
so good. Oh God. I was going to say, the only thing I could really talk about here is in his story about Tim Burton, and Tim Burton would like write stuff, said something like, "Oh, I would never read anything or watch anything written by Kevin Smith." And when Kevin Smith wrote his book in 2012, Tough Shit, he wrote that in the, the acknowledgments and books.
Yeah.
He had that quote in and I laughed. And I watched it and I looked at the back. I was like, oh, okay, that's really funny.
God, yeah. And why wouldn't you? If you got any type of sense of humor, of course you pull that move.
Right? Like, how could you not? It's
exactly
so good. So good. Now, given that you and I are both podcasters, Neil, I feel it's perfect to segue into talking about Kevin Smith's podcast. And Kevin has been known over the last, almost 15 years with podcasting.
He's an OG podcaster.
Yeah.
It's kind of ridiculous how long he's been in the game.
God, when did he start Smodcast? It was probably 2008, 2007?
Yeah, it sounds about right. Yeah, it's been a long time. It's like I said, he's one of the originals. He saw the potential in podcasts right away and jumped on it. And good for him. Because honestly, I don't know, how many other podcasts are you aware of that are still around from the really early days?
Just Smodcast.
Yeah, that's the only one I'm familiar with. There might be others, but that's the only one I can think of.
Yeah, but even the super successful ones today, like Joe Rogan and all the stuff, they started not even 10 years ago.
No, exactly. So the original ones are few and far between. So I will say I was a bigger fan of Jay and Silent Bob Get Old than Smodcast. So I kind of fell into Smodcast backwards. I fell into it that way. Because I love Jay and Silent Bob Get Old.
Oh God, that podcast is really good. They were so good. I don't know. Are they still doing it?
I don't know. Honestly, I haven't seen a new one in the longest time, which, hey, so be it. I realize like they've each got stuff going on. And
Yeah.
now that Jay's got his family, you know what? So be it. But regardless, worth the listen to go back and listen from start to the latest episode and go through it, because what a progression. Um and some of those stories, like there are stories that are just heart-wrenching, and then there are stories that will make you almost piss your pants laughing. It's not very often that you hear someone be that upfront about addiction and some of the things that they've done in the depths of their addiction. And like, it's no holds barred, like the stuff Jason talks about. And Kevin mentions it all the time, like about that call that he used to get. I think it was People Magazine that told him that Jay was dead. And then Jay calls him back right after, right? Like, yo, Kev, why are these people saying I'm dead?
Yeah,
Like,
that's just, it's really hard for listeners, but it's one of these things where it's like you definitely get a lot of the dramatic moments, but they sprinkle in a lot of humor. And I know that you
it is
mentioned
so
that you
good.
got a chance to see them live. I got to get you to talk a little bit about that, because honestly,
Yeah.
I'd watched the DVDs that they did when they were in the UK. Talk about hilarious. I mean, so good.
So good. So good. I got to go see him in Regina. I got to experience Regina. The Kevin Smith and Jay podcast that they were doing was at the casino in Regina in the big hall, and sold out show. I got one of the last tickets available. It was up in the I guess not balcony, but like, kind of that area. And I didn't get a chance to meet. I was hoping to get the bod shirt that I have signed by, honorary Canadian, because Kevin does love pretty much almost everything Canadian. So that didn't happen, but the show itself was so good. Apparently, he went that day to a local record shop and, was looking for a couple things and, found a couple products as well while he was there. I'm using that term loosely. So had a good time. Hung out with the folks there at the record shop and gave them a shout out, and they did their usual stuff that they do on the podcast, and then did some Q&A at the end. And for the people that paid for the experience, there's a meet and greet afterwards. The story from Jay was a little bit more risque. I don't know if I don't know if you remember at the time, but this was around the time in the podcast where Kevin was talking about going for the mall massage a lot.
Yep.
Okay. So Jay had decided to kind of get going on the same thing. And in the episode, I forget which number it is, but he had made reference to trying to track one down in Regina. So he went and found a place. And long story short, the place that he ended up finding offered other services. So he had to politely find a way out of that situation, which he did, but he wasn't quite expecting that. He was a little surprised.
I mean, how could you not, right?
Yeah, especially when it's a city you're not familiar with. You're only there for like 24 hours. You just want to get, somebody to work on your back or something like that, your shoulders, whatever. Okay, innocent mistake. I get that. But then to go on to a podcast with I'm assuming hundreds of thousands of listeners and talk about that. Oh, dear God.
Right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's funny that you mentioned that, because I remember listening about those stories when Kevin talked about Hollywood Babylon. And this is what I want to talk about for a little bit here, Neil, because definitely out of all this podcast, this was one of my favorites. I think this is the show that got me into the podcasting scene with him, because kind of like yourself, I kind of fell backwards into Smodcast, where I went from Hollywood Babylon, and then I heard Smodcast and Janice I Love Get Old and some of the other shows he was doing. I absolutely love Hollywood Babylon, because honestly, it's all about, Hollywood and pop culture stuff and all.
Totally.
And Ralph Garman is just the star, that given all the impressions that he does. And of course, I think think they had the voice actor for Batman from the original animated series from the early 90s. They had him on the show and a few things. And just like yourself, when talking about Jansen getting old, I saw Hollywood Babylon in 2018 in Vancouver at the Commodore Ballroom.
Nice.
And I always said, I says, man, if they ever bring Hollywood Babylon to Vancouver, I'm so going to go. Day that news dropped, I bought the tickets. I paid everything. I went over and it was so good. I had such an awesome time. And I remember that show because the Commodore Ballroom, for those who don't know, is this big kind of not club, but it's like not a theater, not a club. But it's kind of it's just a big room. It's a big room and whatever. So many bands have come through from like, I mean, Throw Fucking Rock. You could probably hit somebody from like the Tragically Hip to Bad Religion.
Oh, totally.
Whatever. It's one of like the key rooms in Vancouver. And so anyway, they brought the show to Vancouver. And kind of like what you're saying about Muse and Kevin with the massage parlor, we were standing in line and somebody was just like, holy shit, that's Ralph. Because they had a comic shop like 2 doors down and here's Ralph and he couldn't get in. He literally had to get he had to get Kevin or one of the security guards to come in and open the door for him because he couldn't get back in.
Oh my God.
So he's
Can you imagine?
He's standing for like 15 minutes and he's just like, oh, hey guys, what's going on? He's just kind of laughing about it. And then the show starts. And of course they're talking about, because they'd never brought Babylon to Vancouver, and they're talking like, have you ever been to Vancouver? Yeah, I never brought, it's the first time bringing the show. And I yell out in the middle of the show, it's about fucking time. And the mics picked it up, and
Nice.
I laughed so hard when I heard that back. I was like, yes.
Nice. Oh, that's so good. Oh, that's awesome.
I gotta find that episode because it was so good.
Yeah, that's like me with that one episode of Jane Silent Bob too. I got to go back and try and find the Regina one, but I will say the fact that we both went back and found out about Smodcast though after is awesome because they're not all gems. I will say this. I do love Smodcast for what it is, but good God, the Scan BCs alone are worth it. I mean, the conversations with him and Mosier. Oh my
God, absolutely.
Yeah, the conversations with him and Mosier are usually some of my favorite ones. But the Scan BCs are definitely worth listening to alone.
Oh my God, yes. And I have it in my notes too, because I remember listening to one and they were doing a Scan BC and it was somebody in Vancouver. Police were called to this guy and police had maced him because he was being mistaken for a bear. And so the guy's just like, I'm not a bear. And Scott goes, shut up, Grizzly.
Exactly.
And it's so fucking stupid. And I died laughing. I was like, this is awesome.
And the fact that they animated some of these, right? And they're on YouTube. I mean, come on. Oh, God. They're so good.
Speaking about Smodcast, I got to ask, have you gone back to listen to the more recent episodes the last probably month or so where they did the Clerks 2, like TOO, where they had some of the other cast members from the show?
No, I'm behind on my Smodcast. There's a couple of podcasts I'm a little bit behind on. That is one of them. So I have to go and check those out.
Yeah. The one episode I highly recommend listening to is one where they have Brian O'Halloran and the Chuli's gum rep on, because with Brian O'Halloran, like he's on the show talking about how his dad was a pool hustler and all this shit in the Bronx before they moved to Jersey. And then they're talking about, and Kevin's like, yeah, about Dante. He's, I was looking at Ernie, the guy he originally had. He's like, this guy's way too pretty to be Dante. And the other guy's too pretty. And fucking poor Brian O'Halloran sitting there like, are you saying you cast me because I was ugly? It's like yeah, pretty much. And the whole episode, then they're talking about, because even the Chuli's gum rep, they talk about how he was even considered casting. And Brian's like, I'm still fucking sitting right here.
That totally sounds like something that they would talk about on that show, though. God.
Yeah, but they talked about how even the delivery was just not perfect because it sounded like somebody with confidence. With Dante, you needed more of a whiny, be like, I'm not even supposed to be here today.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. It's just, but again, he nailed it, I thought, for the most part.
Just a side note, when talking about Clerks, just on a side note here, has anybody ever asked Kevin why did in the beginning of that movie when Dante just falls out of the closet? he's probably got to be asked about that, because it's a scene that even I watch and I'm like, why was he even sleeping in the closet?
Honestly, I just automatically assumed that he was partying the night before, and drunk him thought it was a good idea because he wasn't supposed to be there the next day.
Actually, that's a pretty good explanation. I'm not going to lie, Neil.
It's just people do stupid things when they're drunk. So
yeah, I mean, who hasn't though? Now,
slept in a closet, yeah.
Maybe. I mean, actually, I should tell a side story here. One of my buddies I used to work with, so his girlfriend, and I guess her mom and dad or whatever, went down to Mexico for Christmas one year, and my buddy's not really a drinker, so he got plastered the first night he was there.
Oh God!
And his girlfriend went to bed, and next thing you know, she wakes up to him peeing in the closet.
Oh
he
God!
Just had the doors open, and he's peeing into the closet. She's like, "What are you doing?"
Please tell me they still bug him about that.
Yes.
Okay, good. Rightfully so.
They're married with 2 kids now, so yes, absolutely.
Oh God. Oh, that's awesome.
Now, one of the final things we need to talk about here, Neil, is kind of I didn't know how to put this because, again, minus podcasting, spoken word, and all the stuff he does, Kevin's been known to do a lot of the content, whether it be comics, animation, TV shows. And one thing that I want to talk about here, and we've mentioned it with some of the people who was in like Clerks and some of the cast members, is got to be Comic Book Men, which was the show on AMC. Now, I got to ask, Greg, were you ever a big fan of Comic Book Men back in the day?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Watched them all. Loved it. I mean, it's hard not to, as the geek that I am, not to love that show. Seeing all the, whether it's the comic books or the memorabilia itself, or just his comic book store in general, to not want to watch that that show. But then on top of that, you have the guys on the show itself, right? And these are like Kevin's like ride or dies, right? Like the fact that you get to see Walt and you get to see, I mean, come on, Brian, and like these guys are they're such unique characters. And to see them go about their daily life and give Ming just the hardest time every episode, it's gold.
I think for myself, Comic Book Men was one of those shows that I was definitely aware of it back in the day. I watched it sparsely. Like if it was on, I wouldn't really go out of my way to watch it because I know that it followed The Walking Dead, which that's another show that I never really got that into. I watched the first season. I was just kind of like, I don't care about the characters. The zombies can kill them, eat them for all I care.
Okay, fair enough.
But with Comic Book Men, it was one of those things where, and I love Mike Chen's reaction where I think it was the episode where Lou Ferrigno came in to get Brian Johnson to start working out, and Brian's just like, yeah, it's been a while since I've been in the gym, and Mike sort of snickers and he just looks at him and goes, do you want to get smacked in the face?
It's honestly like the interactions between those 4 are so genuine, and I'm not saying they're necessarily positive, but they're so genuine. It's hard not to appreciate that aspect of the show. So I'm not a big fan of reality TV, but if I was going to watch anything that might fall into that category, this is one of them, so because you can tell nothing's really, scripted per se.
No, it's
what I mean?
It's almost kind of like they have like, okay, here's a few things we need to hit on. Just kind of roll camera. Yeah,
we have a couple ideas of what we want to do this week, but then they're not going to script out the entire scene. No, they, if they want to get the Batmobile there, okay, great, we'll have the Batmobile there, and then they're going to have a conversation about it, like we're doing now, where it's not scripted. At least I don't think. Am I off script right now? No. Anyway. But the point is, it's all genuine, right? Like nothing's controlled really, stuff like that, which I really appreciate. So the fact that it's just 4 friends that get to hang out in the comic book shop that another friend owns, and that's what they do for a living is, sell stuff and make money and stuff like that. How can you not love that?
Now, I know for a number of years you were involved with the Sask Expo, and I understand, I think Mike Chen was there, and I want to say one of the other guys were there. Did you ever get a chance to meet them in the past?
Unfortunately, I didn't. No, I did not. Either here or in Calgary. But that's my own doing. It's not that I didn't want to, but it just so happened that the times that they were available for meet and greets were also the times that I had to choose between, do I meet them or do I meet Carrie Fisher or do I meet William Shatner or do I meet? So it's not that I didn't want to, believe me, but I had to get other stuff going. So I don't regret it, but we'll wait and see.
Yeah.
The expo is actually starting up again here pretty quick. So I don't think I'll be going this year, but if they happen to be around next year, I'll probably go and see if I can get a picture, maybe an autograph, something like that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, the last couple of things I want to talk about here and is talking about animation, because again, Kevin has been involved with a few of animated shows, whether it be the Clerks animated series and Jay and Silent Bob cartoon. And I think for me, I don't have too much to say on them just because, again, I watched the Clerks animated series. I watched a couple of episodes and I was like, okay, it's good. That's basically what it came down to. And then, of course, Jay and Silent Bob, I watched maybe 5-10 minutes of one of the episodes. I'm like, I am not sitting through this.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the Clerks one in particular, if it was rolled out again now, revamped, maybe a little edgier humor, put on something like, let's say, Adult Swim, as opposed to, other networks, I think it would fare better. But like you said, it was good, but I think it would be a different story if it was re-released now and kind of, tweaked a bit.
Yeah, but that's another show that you look at some of the people they got for that. I think it was Alec Baldwin, I think was in the first episode. They had Michael Richards on there, who is Kramer and Seinfeld, obviously. But they had some really big names on that show too. And again, maybe it just comes back to the clout that Kevin has within the community, like the film community, where he can still go out and be like, okay, do you want to come do this movie? Sure. Like even look at the last Jay and Silent Bob movie where he had Chris Jericho and he had Method Man.
Great.
And it was one of those movies that I'm just like, I didn't personally care for it. I just kind of, the second act was just bullshit. If I'm being perfectly honest, if it was entertaining, I could have dealt with it. But when you see, spoiler, Chris Jericho as like a grand wizard, you're just watching that and you're like, okay, Chris Jericho in the ring as a heel is great. And Mike and I, we've talked about it in the past, but it's just one of the things where it's like, I don't buy him as like a KKK member. I'm sorry. That's just me.
I guess the thing with that movie for me is the high point of the movie is that speech in the hall, right? That big dramatic speech.
Yeah, which apparently wasn't even in the original script. It was just kind of a thing that Ben Affleck showed up and Kevin wrote it. It's like, oh, here you go. This is what we're doing today.
Yep. And thank goodness, because that honestly is the high point of the film for me. I mean, don't get me, there's a few moments in the movie otherwise that kind of made me laugh, but that is the high point of that film for me. So, and even I think Affleck mentioned it in an interview saying, holy shit, he actually wrote something that's, so yeah, I agree with you on that one.
Yeah. So Neil, I don't really have too much to say. If you have anything you want to close out here for today's episode.
Well, the only other thing I wanted to mention about Kevin is, you mentioned it earlier, is his writing. There's some really good comic books that if you haven't checked them out, that you can check out online or go to your local comic shop and see if you can find the back issues. He did a really good storyline for Green Arrow back in the day called Quiver. I thought it was a good one anyway. He's done a couple of really good Batman storylines. There's one in particular where I think it was only a three issues, and it was him doing the writing and Walt Flanagan doing the art, and it was Cacophony, Batman Cacophony, and that's where he introduced, I believe it was a new villain called Onomatopoeia, and check that one out. He's done some other comics too, but I would recommend that for sure. So he's kind of, this is going to sound so corny, but he's got so many hands, or his hands in so many cookie jars. It's hard not to run into something he's done between all the stuff we've discussed. And then on top of that, like some of the TV show stuff he's done for like some of the superhero shows and things like that. You got to go back and give some of his stuff a try if you haven't already.
I think the last thing I want to mention here is something we didn't even mention was that he got involved with the newest He-Man series that got a lot of flack on social media. And I don't know why. I loved it. Yeah. I never saw it. So I can't really comment on it.
It's kind of split into two parts. Like the first section of the series is like, I don't know, 6-8 episodes. And then the second part, same thing. Watch it. And then if you want, we'll have a whole other podcast talking just about that, because you'll see why after the first one, he got so much flack for it. But after watching the whole thing, I can honestly say I loved it. I thought he did a great job. And I'm old enough. I grew up on the original He-Man. So I get it. I know that there's some people out there that are going to be butthurt no matter what you do. Whether it's like something like He-Man or Transformers or whatever. But I thought he did a great job. So I think some people are they're just too headstrong and hold too tight of a grip on their characters that they love. And I am partly guilty of that as well as a Marvel geek. I get it. But at some point you got to let go, because it's not just about what you grew up on. It's about what the current generation needs to grow up on.
Yeah, it's kind of like people when Michael Keaton was casted Batman after all the years that Adam West was that. And they're like, well, no, he's Mr. Mom. He can't do this.
Exactly. So, and that's exactly like, yeah, when a Marvel movie comes out, so what if the backstory isn't exactly what they wrote in the comics? Who cares? The fact is, they're getting it on the big screen. They're putting it out for all generations to see. That's the big thing. So go from there.
So Neil, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show here to this evening to talk about Kevin Smith. Now, before we head off into the close, first of all, where can my listeners anyway find you on social media, and where can they find Bahdcast?
Well, if you're going to look up Bahdcast, just look up the word Bahdcast, BAHD cast, on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whichever evil social media empire you would like to look it up on, and go from there. You can look up, my social media handle is _Neil_world on Twitter, Instagram. And yeah, thanks again for having me on, and make sure you invite me back, because this was pretty good.
And the only thing that you haven't plugged yet was Only Hams.
Only Hams, that's just a pet project. If somebody wants to follow Only Hams on Instagram, by all means, have at it. I haven't posted anything in a bit, but I'm looking for some good content, ham related content. So make sure you go follow Only Hams.
Well, that wraps up this episode of the Gr8Wyte Experience. Just a reminder, you can find the show on Twitter at Gr8Wyte Pod, as well as on YouTube and Spotify. For this episode, I'm your host, Taylor Gibson, and I will see you next time.